everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. This week's show is with Mark G. Karris. He is a best-selling author, and his latest book is The Diabolical Trinity. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to all of your comments and questions. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you are on Facebook, please grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or a question. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. I want to give a big shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you. If you like the show, you can help by supporting me and going to my website. There you'll find literally dozens of ways and a ton of new pics from a new photo shoot I just did. But thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation. I appreciate you all. And if you haven't heard, we are doing a live show at the Wild Goose Festival. The festival is July 13th through the 16th, and come watch and be a part of the show. The Wild Goose is a one-of-a-kind gathering that brings together activists, artists, and seekers from all walks of life to explore justice, art, spirituality, and community. It's held at Vanoy Farms in Union Grove, North Carolina, and I would love to see you guys there. They have engaging workshops, inspiring panels, and interactive experiences. The Goose has something for everyone. As a Fireside Peep, you'll get $50 off the price of an adult weekend ticket. Just use the discount code SHERRY. So mark your calendars and be part of this incredible community that's committed to making a positive impact in the world. To get more information and your tickets, go to wildgoosefestival.org. I look forward to seeing you all there. Okay, enough housekeeping. Let's meet our guests and get smarter. I guess it would have helped. I knew I was forgetting something. Had to share my screen. Dr. Mark Gregory Karris is a licensed marriage and family therapist in full-time private practice in San Diego, California. He specializes in religious trauma, men's issues, and couples therapy. Mark is the author of the best-selling books Divine Echoes, Reconciling Prayer with the Uncontrolling Love of God, and The Diabolical Trinity, Healing Religious Trauma from a Wrathful God, Tormenting Hell, and Sinful Self. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Mark. I am so glad to talk to you about this.
I am so excited to be here. Yeah, looking forward to the chat.
Hello to our audience Facebook user. Not sure who you are, but I'm sure that you're a regular. So I just love this book. And as I said to you before the show, I'm only on page 100, I think is what it is. And I have almost 4 pages of notes. So the start of it was kind of triggering for me because I saw, I'm always one that says the layers of religious trauma are like an onion. And your book revealed so many layers of that onion that I was like blown away. And just literally at the start of it, you wrote, in those days, I constantly took upon myself to fight the demons lurking around every corner. Like some sort of warrior magician going into battle, my prayers for myself and others included mysterious spells such as, I bind you in the name of Jesus. I was like, oh my God, I still say rebuke. I still say it. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was there in that level.
Oh my. Well, listen, no offense. Please continue with the rebuking.
Well, yeah. When you realize that there's a layer there, you see where it resonates. And it was, my mom used to rebuke me on a regular basis. Anything that was going on, anything she didn't like, it was rebuke. And I bind you in the name of Jesus. Yeah. And it's such a egotistical point of a stance to stand from, don't you think?
Um, I think, a word that just comes to me would be more scary. It was,
Yeah.
I can only speak from my experience, but being in that environment where there may have been some sense of adventure, um, to feel like I'm Gandalf and pleading the blood around doorposts and saying, "You shall not pass." You know, but it was very fearful, because that's very scary to think that there are demons everywhere, which is
Yeah.
what I thought, that they can follow me into rooms, that they can oppress me, that they can possess me. And that was scary to always kind of looking around my shoulder. And it also gets deeper in the sense of always being conscious of sin. So if I
Hmm.
did something wrong, then I thought that God would allow a demon to harm me in some way. So that is not good for one's nervous system over a long period of time.
No.
I have a different view of demons at this point, but it's one of the layers, right, of the onion, potential religious trauma for folks in that way. It certainly was for me. Mhm.
Yeah, the Wayne Dyer's Power of Intention
Mm.
switched all of that for me. Before
Uh,
that, I was figuratively and sometimes literally walking around like this, like, oh God, his wrath is gonna just shoot me down right now. I
yeah.
surely deserve
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
It was, in fact, I saw that in your book, and I was like, oh my God, I say, actually said that was that I deserve those types of things. And it
Yeah.
really is abuse.
It really is. I mean, this is in the Diabolical Trinity. So the reason why I was actually focused on hell, but then I'm like, you cannot separate hell from these other doctrines, such as, in other words, there has to be a wrathful God who created hell,
Yeah.
and then there has to be evil, sinful people to be put there. So it's all related. So this diabolical trinity of beliefs that's so common, and there's other certainly traumatizing aspects of religion, but those three, but sort of alluding to the original sin and the original sinful hellbound people. I find no good in such a doctrine. And
Yeah.
it's really sad working with people. I came into Christianity at the age of 21, but I can't imagine for those who, were young kids and were indoctrinated with these kinds of beliefs, to the point of their parents scaring them, like God is watching you. Well, if you do that, then, God could send you to hell. What does one think that's going to do? I don't know if people are thinking how that's going to affect a person's psyche. They just deem it as truth, but I don't think people are aware of the deleterious ramifications of these toxic theologies.
For me, in fact, I posed this question in my notes because for me, I was saved at 6, and the
Mm.
terror pretty much started right then. But hell was for people who weren't saved like me. So I
Mhm.
cried and had huge trauma, so fearful for my friends and family that they were going to hell. And
Right.
my question was like, was that because I was taught the supreme doctrine and I had no doubt because I was saved? I was fine. But the terror that the crying, the sobbing of viewing my friends and my father burning in hell
Right.
totally
Right.
traumatized me.
Yeah. This is, the researchers have talked about hell anxiety.
Hmm.
So you're alluding to something that's not often discussed is, yes, one can be very anxious about what their afterlife, what will happen for them. They could suffer eternal conscious torment. Sadly, even for Christians, I know that was the case for me. And in the Pentecostal tradition, while there was talk about this Jesus guy who saved people, I mean, every altar call was an attempt to somehow save ourselves from a God who we thought was maybe angry at us, and that we were so small and worm like that we had to literally beg. for
Yeah.
God to, be kind to us and, don't punish us, kind of thing. But in hell anxiety, one can also be anxious, like you said, for relatives, for friends.
Yeah.
So there is what they call a hell anxiety scale that researchers have came up with. And so it's, I think, 9 statements, and some examples are: sometimes it's difficult to control my worry about hell. I
Mm.
feel an intense fear of hell when I do something I'm not supposed to do. And I'm fearful when ministers and other religious authorities talk about hell. And so researchers this is sort of an emerging field in the field of psychology. But right now, people are trying to operationally define religious trauma and what's known as adverse religious experiences, and just really trying to understand the ramifications. Because back then, gosh, a few decades ago, it was very prominent for people to understand spiritual abuse.
Hmm.
So that gets into, yeah, we can understand how authoritarian kind of leaders can harm others through coercion, manipulation, control, and of like. But it's just more recently that we've shown, and this is probably through Marlene Winnell's pioneering work, and that beliefs, so religious ideas, not just authoritarian figures, but ideas, can have such an effect on us. But hell anxiety is real, and hell anxiety for others is real. And then if you think about how sad it is with all that energy dedicated
Totally.
fear and anxiety, as opposed to one being freed up to be able to love others and themselves in more effective ways, and just to experience more vitality in life. That's what's so sad about it.
Well, and I wasn't spared from my own personal fear, but
Mm-hmm.
their focus on, because I was saved, their focus was don't sin, or because if Armageddon happens right then
Mm-hmm.
you're going to hell regardless if you're sinful or not. In fact, my mom, in the notes that I wrote, she would say stuff like, if I burned myself as a child, she'd say, oh, imagine what hell's like.
Ooh.
Or yeah, and I'm sitting there crying going, I'm burned, and she's
Yeah.
lecturing me about how you better watch out.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Mm-hmm.
had just stopped a friendship with her best friend because her best friend had gotten a boyfriend, and so she was living in sin.
Mm.
And at that time, I got a boyfriend, and my mother called me and said, you better take Diana's phone number down because you two are going to need each other after Armageddon.
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
These types of things they're abusive. And I loved the fact that
Mm.
I made a note that I'm Sarah in your book, where
Ah.
you describe that, because of the abandonment, and all of those things. But I loved where you were empathetic about her mother, saying those things to her and doing those things because they're human. These
Mhm.
fears are real to them, and they're trying to
Yeah. Yeah.
spare their loved ones all of this pain and all of this frustration if they would just believe.
Yeah, it adds to a very nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a sociology of religion lens, I think it does offer for me a lens of compassion. Now I understand if people are like, "F that, I'm angry," and how could these
Yeah.
toxic, traumatizing kind of people do this kind of stuff? It's just pure child abuse, and I get it. And then I also, for me, I look back at human history and see that religious beliefs of the afterlife have existed for thousands of years, and parents have been telling kids about what's going to happen in every different culture. And there are whether maybe it wasn't a divine figure, but the earliest forms of religion was animism. And within that, one can think, wow, back in the day, maybe my relative will be mad at me and maybe they'll punish me, or something bad will happen to me in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And they would teach kids about this stuff. And is that child abuse? They've been doing it for thousands of years with everyone with their different afterlife narratives.
Well, the Egyptians had
It's
a
an
hell.
interesting. Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Egyptians, even some Buddhist kind of philosophies talk about hellish experiences in some ways. Yeah, most religions have some form of afterlife narratives. Not every has an afterlife with a punitive deity, but there are just it's all over the world where typically
Yeah.
religion is found. Yeah.
I loved how, because it's like I was reading and going, but, and then I would get to where you were addressing this. I'm like, yeah, right on. And,
Mm.
and how you talked about Dante and how we know most of what we fear of hell from his writings.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's not only Dante, but actually, and I didn't flesh this out in the book, but there is apocalyptic literature that existed before Dante,
Yeah.
and there is sort of Saint Peter's apocalypse. I think Paul has an apocalypse. So there is apocalyptic literature that did probably inform Dante, but Dante definitely influenced much of our civilization when it comes to beliefs about God and the afterlife and the very dramatic, visionary ways of the vast, vivid imagery of this stuff. Yeah, I mean, he had such an impact, and it's shown through our media and books and pictures and paintings and
Well,
writings.
and I
So.
love that you used the analogy of the monster under the bed,
Mm,
because I mean, it really is. When in your book you talk about how, if a child says there's a monster under my bed and the parent says, you're right, there is a monster under your bed, how
right,
much damage that's going to do. And that's what religion
right.
does.
Yeah, yeah. There's a monster under your bed, and that monster got your brother and your aunt, and could
Yeah.
get you if you don't behave in the right way. But this monster is, a god who is proclaimed as all powerful and all knowing, and can not only inflict physical violence upon you in this life, as shown throughout the Hebrew scriptures and sometimes in the New Testament, but also can send you to hell to be tormented by what only your mind can conceive of as fire and brimstone and demons having fun and poking and prodding and punishing. And yeah, it's very scary stuff, and should be reconsidered when sharing with kids, and I would say even adults.
Well,
Mm.
and in through my deconstruction was happening before there was even a word. Hell was one of the things that really showed me that this doctrine was bullshit. Because I
Mm.
started, I was looking at it as a mother. And I
Mhm.
use the example a lot of times with people when they say, no, the judgment should be there or hell should be there. And I say, would you do that to your own child? And they
Mm.
say, well, no, no. And I say, oh, if you as a mere human would not treat your children this way, then why have we conceived a God to do the same thing? And
Yeah.
it makes love so destructive. It makes it judgmental. It makes it abusive. I mean, one of the things that you quoted was hell is a terrifying place, but hell glorifies God immensely because it makes so many of his qualities visible and knowable. And my note was abuser says what? Don't
Right.
make me hit you. I mean, it was like it it's just such an abusive, I say in my book that the God of my religion was the biggest abuser of all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's so true. It's I think I share in my book too. I worked with domestic abuse victim advocates for a bit, and it's so similar in language. You know,
Yeah.
I love you, I care about you, but if you don't do what I say, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you. And but if you do what I say, then we could just be happy together. And if you don't, I'm gonna it's
Yeah.
just back and forth cognitive dissonance producing God who loves me, but God who can hurt me, harm me, kill me, punish me. That just there's something that doesn't add up about that. And
It literally
no,
justified my abuse from my husband as
oh my
well
goodness,
as me enduring it.
right, Right.
because he was the leader. God was an avengeful and wrathful God. And I must submit.
Mm.
So it not only justified, and again, he's passed, but he would say, "Oh, I never abused you. I was, in the name of God, and I was being a holy man of God." But it
Right.
was. I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
realize that it was even abuse until I started to get out of the situation. I was like, "Holy shit, I'm an abused woman," and I
Right.
totally was 100% justified by the church.
Yeah. I mean, people, when they think of abuse, they could think of just the big, well, sexual abuse, or, a parent punched the kid or hit the, physically assaulted.
Overt.
But yeah, there is that, death by a thousand cuts,
Yeah.
the emotional abuse, the mental abuse, spiritual abuse. I mean, it's stuff that people don't realize how much it really affects people over a long period of time. And it's sad because in the veneer of pseudo spirituality, is toxic religion, and there's so many different power dynamics involved that people don't understand. No, when you use power in this way, it harms a person's psyche.
Yeah.
But people just don't see it that way. Another person's theological trash is another person's theological treasure. And it is interesting that some people, they look at hell and they look at God's character throughout the entire, Bible, and say it all makes sense. That's what a just God should look like. But God is both just and loving, and they have no problems with it. It makes sense. Well, Mark, you just don't understand. That's how perfect God is and holy God is. And if you only knew what one sin would do to God, I'm like, what planet are people on?
Again, would you do that with your child?
Right,
I mean, if your child could, fucks up once, you're done. Into
right.
the fire you go.
I know it's well, Mark, God has different standard. No, I mean, shouldn't we be like God?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
in the book, I do try to explore and deconstruct the notion of a violence-prone God and eternal hell by exploring the absurd notion that our compassion, goodness, and wise discipline meter functions more adequately than God's. Like, it doesn't even make sense.
No.
Why? How is it possible that I could be more merciful and
Exactly.
kind and gracious to my kids than God is? Like,
Exactly.
that there's something really amiss there. I can't be. By definition, God must transcend and be
Be
much
better than
more
us.
exactly in all areas.
Yeah.
What are the contemporary kid gurus and researchers on what discipline does, and like they're smarter than God?
Yeah.
No, when you spank and hit kids violently, that's going to have ramifications for kids' sense of identity and ability to be good moral citizens in the world where things come intrinsically and not just extrinsically. But then we think like how it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up when you start thinking about it. But here's the thing, I get it, because if you start teasing out one of these threads, no, God killing Egyptian babies cannot be accurate, or God, creating a flood so most of the world and animals die,
And let's build
including
an
babies.
amusement park to it. I mean,
I know.
women were banging on the ark trying to save their children. People were drowning around them,
Yeah.
but Moses was right. I mean, the whole story. I used to sing the songs. I used to be like, hey, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
ark. Now I look at it as this just dreadful, horrible thing that no loving God would ever do. I mean, and the whole
Yeah.
thing doesn't make sense anyway. It justifies
Yeah.
an abusive love all the way down the charts, whether it be an abusive marriage or an abusive parent. I mean, the only thing I was ever taught was violence is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Through Armageddon, through Jesus Christ
Yeah.
being assassinated, through all of those things, it always ended up that violence was the answer, never love. Never
Mm,
love. And when I started looking out,
mm,
and you even say it in your book about how people are literally turning away from the church because of these asinine beliefs. I mean,
mhm.
these horrible judgmental things that do nothing good for our world except create more fear, which we're
Mm,
continually warned against in the Bible, but it really
yeah.
does a lot of damage.
Yeah. Fear for breakfast, fear for lunch, fear for dinner.
And
It's
when you're channeling that energy, you get a whole lot of things to be afraid of.
yeah. I wish that I was taught the Bible or how to read the Bible differently.
Mm,
I think people would be much less traumatized if they were not taught a hyper fundamentalist, hyper literalist reading of the scriptures.
yeah.
But if someone said, "Well, Mark, hey, this is how people back then perceived who God was," and they were, in a sense, culturally conditioned and doing the best they could to understand the divine, and they had myths and they wrote things in very dramatic ways with hyperbole and they exaggerated a lot of times, and but they tried to be a people who wanted to be in community, and like, I don't know, I would read it differently. It would make much more sense. I would say, oh, that's my ancient relatives. Wow, they had some
Well,
interesting beliefs.
and instead of being the inerrant word of God, it's more like, one of the tabloids that we have out now.
Hmm.
The way to understand it. And I was the same way. It was the inerrant word of God. So
Yeah.
when it said something, there was so much validity there. I just didn't know that it said to kill your children, to kill other tribes, to do all of those things that are also justified throughout the Bible by this wrathful God.
Yeah. I mean, I was taught that every this is old King James, but every jot and tittle was, every dot of the I, every single word in the Bible that I was reading was literally from God. And
Yeah.
any attempt to change any of it would be considered blasphemy in some way. So when you're reading and I'm like, oh, God did that. Wow,
Yeah.
holy crap. I'm not gonna, okay, I'm gonna not masturbate anymore. I don't wanna, I don't wanna get killed on the spot here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but if I was taught that that's how my ancient ancestors just, saw things and saw God, and they wrote sometimes hundreds of years after the fact, and they would talk about old events, but they put God in as a main character to help understand. For example, if they got their asses kicked by a neighboring tribe, then okay, I could see how they would make sense of there must have been something we were doing wrong. Maybe sin
Ancient
in the
minds.
community. Yeah, and that God, just the same mindset that would say if our crops, were not growing too well, or if there was a drought, shoot, we better start praying or
We must have
sacrificing
pissed off the
more.
gods.
Yeah, we must appease God in some way. It makes sense. I just wish we were taught about that. It would just make much more sense,
In
and I think
corporate
less
America,
time.
there's usually two different thoughts. One, the manager who is strict, the micromanager who is mean, gets more done than the manager that is the team player and says, hey, we're all in this together. We love these things. That's the way I kind of view the Old Testament and the New Testament. The
Hmm.
problem is that the New Testament is all of the love of Jesus is completely ignored in all of this doctrine of a wrathful God, but yet it's still used because it really is the best form of control.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Now, I think that probably would be on an unconscious level, right? I think most people just it's all the Bible, so I want to just take it
Really? You think
seriously.
it's unconscious?
I Well, like you alluded to in the beginning of our chat, I think some people are just very simple. It's the word of
Mm,
God. I want to be true to what the word of God says. And
okay.
if it says it in the Bible, because remember, and I was kind of talking about this thread piece, if I say that one story in there could not have been God doing that, then really it becomes this fear of the slippery slope where now how can
Mm,
I trust any of the Bible? Right? So if I can't trust all of it, then I can't trust any of it. That
yeah.
becomes so anxiety provoking, such an existential crisis. I must hold to all of it, even though I may push a cognitive dissonance down. But to your point, there are some people who use the Bible as a weapon. I mean,
Yeah.
that are conscious of it and say, no, I'm going to preach this, I'm going to teach this because I want to keep the community, the way I want to keep it, a homogenous form of morality. And they think the stick is more effective than the carrot. And so, yeah, I definitely think there are coercive, manipulative people that are using their power to harm. I do see a lot of people just, simple. I love God. I love the Bible. I love
It's what it
Jesus. I
says.
I
Yeah.
want to, yeah, it says what it says. And, what is that? The BIBLE, basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't,
Another
so some
trigger
people,
there. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So one of the things that let me see where I was going to go with that.
sure.
Um, one of so you talk of the thread, and for me, it
Mm.
was discovering that Adam and Eve weren't the first humans, and that there were people all over the
Ah,
world. That was
hmm,
the thread that started going,
yeah.
and I, through my process of deconstruction and my education and life,
Hmm.
I now view the Bible with a very, very small lens where I separate or replace rather the word God or whatever is used as it with the word love.
Hmm.
And if the passage no longer makes sense, then it's obviously man-made bullshit. If it does
Mm.
make sense, then that is a lesson for us to learn. When we look at everybody or humans as more than human, extraordinary humans, or text as extraordinary text, it can be used as a weapon.
Mm.
Where does our discernment play into things anymore? I mean, that was a word I heard all growing up. You have to be discerning. You have to be
Mm.
discerning. Is there a way to have faith and discerning?
Um, to help me here, the discerning of what in particular?
Discerning as to whether or not what is from God or what is just total
Ah,
bullshit, like killing your
got
kids
it.
if they disrespect you.
Got it. Well, on that note, I do have, I may adjust it, but I have what I call the pentalateral hermeneutic of love. Okay,
Okay.
so this is a hermeneutic, and hermeneutics is just a big word to simplify it. The lenses in which I look at, let's say, the biblical text. And so it helps me determine what passages may be culturally conditioned and sub Christ like portrayals of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so they help me consider what passages have a higher likelihood of reflecting and, in a way, refracting the incredible, beautiful, and loving character of God. So this is my 5-part lens. So this is what I keep in mind as I look at the text. So I look at the fruit of the Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Totally.
I mean, it seems like a simple thing to think about, but is the fruit of the Spirit being exhibited by God or by people who are proclaiming to do things in the name of God? So looking at Galatians, right? Looking at Galatians 5 and yeah, it's just so that's one lens, right? So the fruit of the Spirit, the biblical definition of love in 1 Corinthians 13, right? That makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. The only explicit parabolic picture Jesus gave of God the Father, found in the story of the prodigal son. Does that does this portrayal of God look like God that Jesus portrayed in the God who looked a far way off, who ran to his son, who had, basically said, F you, dad, I want my inheritance. I want to live life my way, who hugged
Yeah.
him and kissed him and, hugged him with pig shit on him, So, okay, is this past? No, that definitely doesn't resemble the prodigal father here. Prodigal literally meaning rationally wasteful and extravagant. Then Matthew talks about perfect love in Matthew 5, and then the radical self-giving, others empowering life of Jesus. So as I look at those things, I'm like, that makes sense. Like that.
Yeah.
So I look at a passage of scripture, I look at that through that penalateral hermeneutic of love. That helps me a little bit, So when I see a God who the text just literally says he burned these people alive because they did not follow God's instructions in the Old Testament, I'm going to say maybe culturally conditioned,
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, no. Okay. You're right. I wouldn't say. I would say definitely, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I realized how hard love is, that's when I was able to go, okay, this is where I need to be. I am not going to worship anybody or anything that causes pain or hurts others or justifies an ego, or it's just because someone said I was supposed to. But I can aim to be the most loving person I can be. And I can attest, I can go through the day and go, should have been more loving there. I succeeded here. But through those challenges to try and be a more loving person, full of grace, understanding, that's when I said, okay, if there is an essence out there that embodies this, that's what I want. I need to be able to pull from this where the hard stuff is. It is so easy to fly off the handle and hate. Most of my regrets are things that came out of my mouth before my mind ever caught up. When I wasn't being conscious, when I was doing things reactionary as opposed to responding, because they're hard.
Yeah.
They're really, really hard. So this vengeful God that people paint is easy. And it's so lazy to just go out and say, okay, damn you to hell, do this, do that. And one of the things that really shook me to my core was bin Laden. He wrote after 9/11, he wrote, and I've brought this up several times on the card, don't at me, hear me out. But he wrote this thing after 9/11, basically justifying why he did what he did. And he felt that it was God's calling for him to do so. So as I was reading it, I was completely disturbed as to what he was saying and how he believed this was God's calling. But I actually pictured him in the holy gates. And what would God say? Was God on our side or was God on his side? And at that moment, I realized that my judgment was completely flawed because it was totally egotistical and not of God's ways, higher than, with love, all of those things that are just so hard to comprehend in the human brain that it has to be something we aspire to.
I love it. Yeah, I'm thinking it really is adventures in missing the point. All the all the theological debates and arguments and people actually arguing, no, God is that violence, you just don't understand. Like, we're so missing the point.
Yeah.
Like, and this is a conclusion I had to come to for myself, I have to focus more on love than I do doctrine or trying to figure it out or figure God out or debate with this person and I just think it really is. So religion can be a defense mechanism that keeps people from really dealing with their own lives, dealing with the unforgiveness in their hearts, right? Dealing with relational problems. We're going to spend more time reading and writing Facebook posts on theology and your relationship with your partner. You're about to get divorced and you're doing absolutely nothing to try to ameliorate the situation or love your kids or feed the poor, or whatever it is. we're all in here.
Yeah.
What is the point if it's not, well, I'm clanging cymbals. I mean, what I'm saying is nothing new. But if love is not demonstrated in action, it's just a bunch of noise. But why we're focused so much on commandment 347 rather than the first one, which is to love God and love
Right.
your neighbor and to
That's
love
too
yourself.
hard. That is way too hard.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, it is so much easier to point the finger. It is so much easier to judge someone else. It's so much easier. I mean, being in LA, there's so much to judge. There's just so much to judge, whether it be the rich or the poor or the drivers or the roads. I mean, there's just a whole thing of judgment around there. So I'm constantly, and while I'm driving, trying to fight my own road rage and everybody out there, I'm constantly thinking of how I can be more loving. How can these things be fixed? How can we do these things? But again, it takes thought, it takes consciousness, it takes will, because my first reaction is cursing you out, not caring why you're doing what you're doing. You are just infringing on my life or something going on. And when we justify that with God is when violence is justified. And without that thought of no, to be more loving, it's all a waste.
Right. Yeah. If you want to know whether or not I'm a Christian, ask my wife.
Oh, I love that.
Ask my kid.
Yeah.
That's where it really comes down to. Ask my colleagues, my friends. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't want to hear your beliefs. I want to see what you do in action.
Faith.
Yeah.
Action is dead. Mm-hmm.
So you say in the beginning of your book that half of it, which I haven't gotten through, admittedly, the other half is how to repair this trauma. What are some steps that people can take? Obviously, everybody listening, go buy the book. It's fabulous. But what are some steps that can be taken to start to see these onion layers and to apply some healing towards them?
Yeah. Well, so part one is looking at the consequences there of religious trauma and what that means. And part two is trying to wiggle hell beliefs from our minds. And I did that because if it's literally religious trauma, then it's going to have lasting adverse effects on one's nervous system. So it's a little different than what one might call adverse religious experience, where I had an experience, it sucked, I didn't like it, it caused me to feel hurt and angry, but I don't have lasting adverse effects due to that. So it's important to distinguish these terms. But in part three, I'm aware that information does not necessitate transformation, that reading a book typically is not going to heal somebody's religious trauma. And it has to be activities, experiences, interventions that are going to facilitate healing deep in the subcortical implicit nervous system. And so part three, over 120 pages of trying to help people do that through the best of contemporary neuroscience and practical therapeutic modalities. So I love it. I love that part. I think it's so important, but to be practical, I don't know if we'll have time, but I get into memory reconsolidation.
Which is what?
Okay, so basically it is just the idea that when we have trauma, then typically we have these fragmented memories that are not put into a cohesive whole that can have lasting adverse effects upon our nervous system, causing some people to primarily be in one of fight, flight, or freeze. Some people put fawning in there or appeasing others. But so when there's these memories in which you've had this event, the memory reconsolidation just is a systematic process that neuroscientists have come to, particularly in Bruce Ecker's work, that says basically there's a way to unlock this memory to make it labile or open to change so that it can be updated or revised in a particular way. That can bring
Interesting.
about transformation and healing. So the how to do that is important. But one example would be using compassionate imagery. So, for example, I have a client and they're working through the religious trauma of an angry, wrathful God. And they have this memory of being in this church service and this event, maybe it was a play, and just deep fear of how they can really go to hell and that God was mad at them and angry and that God could open a can of whoop ass on them. And so, what we do potentially would be how can we bring, to put it very simply, go back to that memory, allow the experiential emotional material to come up from it, the fear, the anxiety, um, and then bring something very positive to bring some TLC to that memory. So, for example, one can use a compassionate imagery of God or an ant or Mufasa from The Lion King. And so, being able to go back in time, if you will, allowing some compassionate figure or one's adult self to go back and to bring some TLC potentially to that younger kid, who was at that play at that time, experienced a deep level of fear with glucocorticoids ripping through their nervous system, causing a deeper sense of trauma that had lasting effects. So, in other words, using imagery, compassionate imagery, to bring some healing to a traumatic memory. So, that would be just one example of using memory reconsolidation in that way. But there are other things like self-compassion, a whole chapter in self-compassion. I think for me, self-compassion and the research around it and the writings, much from brothers and sisters from the East, but also from contemporary researchers like Kristen Neff, who's bringing this work to the forefront of our experiences. And for example, one of the consequences of original sin is shame.
Yeah,
So shame is probably one of the most profound and harmful effects of religious indoctrination. The sense
totally.
of I'm good, I'm a sinner, I'm a worm, all my righteousness is as filthy rags. No one is good but God. My heart is deceitfully wicked. Oh my goodness, I would never talk to this way or tell my son these kinds
Right?
of things. So then, of course, shame, the sense of I'm tainted, I'm flawed, I'm no good, is going to be a consequence. And then that could also fuel the inner critic. Hey, you're going to go to hell, or if you keep doing that, your community is going to reject you and hate you, or you're going to be a loser, and God will punish you. Like, so the shame fueling the inner critic can create a lot of suffering. So
Shame is
self-compassion,
abusive. Shame is totally abusive because it affects their inner person.
identity.
It's
That's right.
not something they did, it's who they are.
Right. Yeah. Uh, it is. To shame somebody is abusive. Now, I'm aware as a practitioner that there's some research on the benefits of shame.
Really?
Um, yeah. In other words, shame has existed as an emotional experience up until this point because it has had evolutionary value. And so,
Okay.
in one of the ways that has evolutionary value, in that it can help us live according to the values of the community or our own internalized
Okay.
values. So then, when we do something wrong, that shame says, "Oh," but the problem is that it should be quickly repaired by loving figures. So when a kid does something wrong and they steal the cookies, and then mom or dad looks at them with an angry scowl, they feel shame, the sense of
Okay.
sort of collapsing in themselves. I did something no good. That wasn't okay. The problem is when that is left unrepaired over a long period of time, those subsequent experiences of shameful acts, then it could be internalized shame. And that could be what we call trait shame instead of state shame. In other words,
Yeah.
you could have shame once in a while, but these people, it's so entangled into their identity. That's where shame, there's toxic shame.
Yeah.
But I think maybe So shame is just, it is par for the course on what it means to be human. But I think there could be an evolved sense of, especially parenting and being leaders in community, where we don't use shame, even though it has evolutionary value, but we can still say, I don't want to use that at all.
Yeah.
I'd rather not shame somebody. I'd rather love somebody or talk to them or tell them who they are and who they, rather than who they're not, and say, hey, maybe this would be in your best interest. Have you ever thought about doing this? Because it may have more
Through a
effective.
lens of love.
Exactly.
So
So
when I deconstructed, I went from being shameful for existing to being shameful for actions. And that's what I meant by, you can be shamed for something you do, but not
right,
for who you are. And I think
right.
that's the difference with religion. It not only shames you for what you do, but it also shames you for who you are, just for being born.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
supposedly this such a piece of shit that, God has mercy on you just to let you live. That
Yes, yes.
type of shame for being just a human being is so abusive, right? I
Yes,
mean, that would
right.
qualify as abuse.
Right. Anytime you're shaming somebody and focusing on their identity and telling them they're no good, a piece of crap, a
Yeah.
loser, and you'll never get it right, or what's wrong with you, and all these kind of shaming statements. Yeah, there's much more
I
effective
can
and loving
apologize.
ways.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can apologize for something I've done. I can't apologize for who I am.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And research do differentiate between healthy guilt and toxic
Well,
shame.
there is.
Right. So healthy guilt, though, it reminds me of what you're talking about. Shame by its essence is a little bit narcissistic. It's about me and how
Mm,
bad I am. But healthy guilt is a sense of, oh, I harmed you, right? Oh, this affected the relationship, right?
yeah,
It's relationship oriented. I'm not stuck in how terrible I am. I'm more concerned about how what I did potentially could have affected our relationship. And
yeah,
then with the extra piece of, what can I do to repair? Right. So it's
exactly.
very constructive as opposed to destructive toxic shame, like you're alluding to.
One of the things that you also address is projection, which
Oh,
I
boy.
thought under the current political climate was really interesting. Again, exposing another layer of the onion. If
Hmm.
your religion teaches you to blame or give credit to everything outside of you,
Mm-hmm.
then it makes projection part of who you are. But
Yeah.
I'm always saying the onus is on us. There is no Satan, there is no evil thing, and you address that.
Oh, yes, yes. That's a
The one thing that really got me though
hmm.
was how Denzel Washington projected Will Smith's humiliation, pride, rage, dormant, tender childhood wounds onto a metaphysical entity called Satan. So to go ahead and project and go, oh, Satan's got me today. Oh, Jesus, take the wheel. Again, releasing all of our power and the onus is on us. And when we
Yes, yes, yes.
project our badness or our sins onto some other creature, it kind of absolves us of everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a whole conversation, and projection. You were referring to Will Smith getting slapped, and then Denzel alluding to, Satan got a hold of him in that night.
Yeah.
But there are other factors involved, and what's that verse that Jesus said? He didn't talk about demons in a sense, but it was out of the heart
Yeah.
comes adultery and murder and all of these
Exactly.
dynamics. He wasn't like, no, it's because of demons. Now, of course, he cast out demons and of that nature, but it does make you wonder when a story in the Bible is describing someone who appears to be having an epileptic seizure.
Yeah.
That's and they're looking at it, and maybe in those ancient times it makes perfect sense.
Of
I'm seeing
course.
someone convulsing and foam out of their mouth. They're possessed by a demon. And so when Jesus goes over there and heals them, yeah, I would make sense of that by, oh, well, Jesus must have cast out the demons to have healed that person. But I don't think projecting our internal stuff is beneficial. In my tradition, we would be casting out everything, spirit of anger, spirit of lust, spirit of pride, spirit of sadness, spirit of hurt. I'm like, no, these are naturally occurring emotions within us as human beings, but we're projecting them on demons to be cast out. Yeah. But I do have the whole demon aspect is just very interesting. But, one of the things that caused me to reflect on deconstructing demons is animals also get depressed and they cut themselves and they kill themselves and they, kill other animals. And I'm not sure I would not say that that's because Satan or demons cause them to do that.
Right.
So that just starts to get strange. So if you're saying what humans do is because of demons, then you'd have to say, well, animals who do the same thing, are you saying demons cause that too?
Exactly.
That would be a little strange, but that gets into demonology and demon talk. But projection, yeah, I think it's something to consider. Anytime we take something in here, project it out there, whether onto God, whether onto other people, whether onto our spouses, projection happens all the time in relationships,
Well, and I really, really, really doubt that if there is a God and we get to heaven, he's going to say, you know what, you did not, talk to so-and-so and they should have done something for you. It's going to be, what did you do? Not, Satan had you on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so we got to look at that. I mean, the accountability factor that is now being washed away from American Christianity there's no accountability if everything's outside of you, and it's always somebody else's fault, and they're always, the victim mentality. It just doesn't work.
Beautifully said. Absolutely. We need to take ownership of our own stuff.
Own it.
Own that stuff. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I still have like 3 pages of notes to go.
I understand.
Mark, this was such a wonderful conversation.
Had a
Thank
great
you
time.
so very much. Everybody go buy his book. Any final words, and where can people find you?
Yes, I'm an old dinosaur. I can't tell you how many people keep telling me, get Instagram, go on this and go. I am on Facebook, but that's as best as it gets. I do have a website. But pick up the book, and I love hearing from readers. I hear from readers all over the world, and it makes my day. So I love interacting, and if you want to wrestle with me on ideas, and I love it. It's I don't have the God's eye view on all this stuff. I'm just trying to share from my heart, and most importantly, trying to help people on the journey from healing from religious trauma. So
it's awesome. Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I will talk to you backstage.
Okay, sounds great.
I hope that you guys found something in today's show that makes you doubt the shame that you have, or doubt the doctrine that makes you feel bad about yourself, because the only things that you can change are your actions to where you're not actually doing those things that can cause you shame. Be kind, love people, don't turn your back on them. Those are things that are loving, and those are things that are godly. So be better, love better, do better. And as always, next week we are talking again with Thomas J. Ord on his book, and we will be having another conversation around these types of things. So next week I will see you at the same bat time at the same bat place, and always walk in love. Go buy his book. It's down here, Diabolical Trinity. Go buy it. It's available on Amazon. Walk in love, everyone. See you next week. Mwah! Bye.